Well, I hate to interrupt the conversation, but good evening and welcome to Nursing Networks. I'm performing the John L. and Helen Kellogg Dean of Nursing at Rush. And this seems to be one of our more popular topics for Nursing Networks, so thank you for joining us tonight. Our audience includes all facets of nurses at Rush: faculty, students, staff nurses, APRNs, and alumni. We're here in part tonight to celebrate our best and brightest, the 2015 Alumni Award recipients, of whom we are extremely proud. But we're also here to celebrate one of the best colleges of nursing in the nation. Recently, on March 16th, the U.S. News & World Report released their latest rankings of America's best graduate schools. This year's momentous because for the first time they ranked DNP programs, and we ranked 5th. An interesting aside is we ranked 5th with Case Western Reserve University. Case has the oldest clinical doctorate DNP program, and ours is the second oldest. So really big company. Overall, our graduate program is ranked 16th out of 519, so that puts us in the top 3% of the programs in the country. Well, it looks like I cut something down. Our site mental health NP program is 2nd, up from 3rd last time. Our clinical nurse leader program 3rd, up from 4th. Our adult gero-acute and primary care, as well as our nurse anesthesia programs, are all ranked 4th. Pediatric primary care NP 5th, and FMP 9th, up from 13th, which is really impressive. But to put all of that into context, every academic program we have that is ranked by U.S. News & World Reports is in the top 10, which I think is really amazing. So these rankings, I think, are in part due to the outstanding forward-thinking faculty here at Rush College of Nursing, also in part due to our brilliant students, and also in part due to the amazing contributions of our alumni and the contributions they make to the health of this nation. So thank you for all that you do in the name of Rush. Tonight we will hear from 2 very accomplished alumni who are nurse leaders and who have consistently demonstrated their commitment to excellence throughout their careers. They will be introduced by another one of the best and brightest, the president of Rush-Presbyterian-St. Nurses Alumni Association, President Marcia Murphy.
Thank you, Dean Foreman, and a warm welcome to all of you. And congratulations to you and the entire faculty on the phenomenal rankings. We recently published News and Views, and we did highlight that in the newsletter because that is one measure of our ongoing success and certainly enhances our alumni pride. I have had the pleasure to serve as president of the Alumni Association with a terrific board of directors, of which several of them are here this evening. If you can please stand. We've got Rachel and Jean Blundy and Gail. Yes. Thank you for your service. And afterward, we still have time for networking and refreshments. So chat with any of us in terms of our alumni activities. So tonight is one of our Nursing Networks events, our spring events, and the purpose of Nursing Networks is twofold. It is to provide an opportunity for our alumni, faculty, students to connect and network. And certainly professional connections create personal and intellectual connections. So we have really been committed to our Nursing Networks event over the years. Secondly, it's an opportunity to provide a learning experience on a current healthcare topic. We provide a CEU, and we have a very, very special evening planned for you this evening, as you've heard. This evening, we will hear from our 2015 Best and Brightest Award recipients. And The format for the evening will be that I will introduce our first award recipient. We will hear a presentation, then the second, and we'll have an opportunity for questions after that. So first I would like to introduce Dr. Jane Llewellyn, who is the recipient of the Excellence in Practice Award. She is the inaugural recipient of this award, a new award that the Board of Directors developed to recognize a leader, a nursing practice leader who's made a significant impact on excellence in patient care and nursing practice. So I'm just thrilled to introduce our first recipient of this award, Dr. Jane Llewellyn. So Dr. Llewellyn received her doctorate in nursing science from Rush in 1982. She is a founding faculty member of Rush College of Nursing and a pioneer in the establishment of the Rush model for nursing. Jane helped to shape the nationally recognized practitioner-teacher role and pioneered the primary care nursing model. As if that wasn't enough, Jane was instrumental in the development of one of the nation's first shared governance models, which has since been emulated by hundreds of institutions all over the country and world. As Rush's Vice President of Nursing and Chief Nursing Officer for over 15 years, she skillfully nurtured the nursing culture at Rush and was an early champion of the Magnet Recognition Program, guiding the nursing staff to achieve Magnet designation and 2 READ designations. Dr. Llewellyn, it's an honor to provide you with this award.
They're heavy. They are heavy. Actually, that sounded kind of like a toast, didn't it? Oh gosh, thank you, Marcia, and thank you to the alumni board and all of you. This really is just such an honor. You know, as Marcia said, I was inaugural faculty here, and to hear what has become of this program that started out from just a few of us that were so naive and didn't have any idea what we were doing, but had a visionary leader that guided us and gave us inspiration. It's really remarkable. And I would like to add my congratulations to our other award winner tonight, who you will hear about, but Chris Casper and I were practitioner teachers very early on in the old early years of the practitioner teacher model, and I knew then that Chris was going to go far in her career, and after you hear her remarks, you will totally understand why I'm glad I'm following her. So thanks very much. Now, when I was thinking about what I would say tonight, I knew, number one, that we're following cocktails, that, you know, I don't have a lot of time, and you all have had a busy day, probably pretty eager to get home and watch the election results. So I thought, you know, maybe I will just keep this a little lighter tonight, and so I'm going to share a travelogue with you. And these are going to be my career lessons from around the world, because that's pretty much what I have been doing since I retired, is going around the world. I think I might be that middle one there. And I'd like to preface all of this advice by telling you that I'm probably not the best one to talk about how to build a career, because mine was not at all approached strategically. I didn't have a grand plan. I didn't follow logical step by step. I didn't do most of the things that you're supposed to do to build a career. But and instead, my career was a combination of luck, opportunity, and probably some good decisions along the way. So the first lesson is to start with a firm foundation. Now, this photo is from my trip to Cambodia. And it's from Angkor Wat. And this was an old Buddhist monastery where they just left it as they found it, with the jungle just growing right out of it. So it must have been a pretty firm foundation to support that. Now, I wouldn't be an acolyte of Dr. Luther Christman if I didn't say that your firm foundation has to be education. I see the heads nodding here. And that kind of brings me to my first good decision, and that was to go to a baccalaureate nursing program. Now, back in the 60s, when I went to school, baccalaureate education was not all that common. And but somehow along the line, I did get good advice and went to the baccalaureate program at the University of Kansas. And when I graduated, I started in the surgical trauma unit at the University of Kansas. And it was a couple of years after that that I was presented with a pretty tempting offer. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. And it was at that time, there were not a lot of advanced nurses in the country, and kind of like now, they needed more nursing faculty. So the government was offering these wonderful traineeships. They were paying full tuition, and not only that, they were paying stipends, monthly stipends. And so I thought, well, that was really too good to pass up. So I enrolled at the University of Colorado to get my master's degree. And that's where I made another good decision, and that was to get a clinical degree. At that time, most of the advanced nursing degrees were either in nursing education or nursing administration. And but I knew I loved clinical, and they had clinical nurse specialist programs that were not all that common. But I knew that's where I wanted to go, so that's what I did. And then actually going for my doctorate was almost kind of an accident as well. I had been conducting some, Luther told us all, we all had to do research. And I had been doing some research on the old Two Jones with Andrea Barsovic. And I found out I kind of liked research. It was pretty neat. But I didn't know a thing about statistics. And so, good to see you here, Lou. And the Doctor of Nursing Science program was just starting. And so I said, I think I'll just take that statistics course. So I'll learn a little bit more about what I'm doing. I took it and kind of liked it, but I knew I still needed to learn more about it, so I took the second course, and then I took the third course. And by the end of taking those 3 advanced statistics courses, I figured, well, maybe I've kind of done one of the harder parts of this program, and so I matriculated then, and that's kind of how I got into the DNSC program. But I get ahead of myself. My next principle. This is from my trip to Morocco. And we were staying at a beautiful hotel. It was on the edge of the Sahara Desert. And they had this camel. His name is Toyota. And every night they would bring Toyota out and walk him around the pool, and we could all kind of go see Toyota. And so one night that camel walked right up to me and gave me a big old kiss. It just kind of reminded me of this principle. If you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just get on. This is from Sheryl Sandberg said this. And actually, there are 2 examples from my career where I think this principle really applied. And the first was after I finished my master's degree and I was trying to decide where to get a position. My sister had been working with Dr. Chrisman at Vanderbilt at that time. And she told me that he was planning to leave Vanderbilt. He was going to be going to Chicago. He was going to be opening a new program it was going to have this wonderful new model, a unification model, where the College of Nursing and the hospital were all going to be under one leadership structure. The dean was also going to be the vice president in the hospital. And so I thought that sounded very interesting. And after talking with Dr. Chrisman and learning more about what his plans were, and visiting then Presbyterian St. Luke's, and I'd never been to Chicago in my life. But I decided that that was just too good an opportunity to pass up. So that was my first seat on the rocket there. And then I think the second time I took a seat on the rocket was when I became the chief nursing officer at Rush. And by that time, our original unification model had seen it had been disbanded. And these were kind of dark days for a lot of us. The medical center had been divided into a hospital within a hospital model. And each service line had its own organizational structure. Nurses reported up differently. Some nurses didn't even report to nursing. At that time, I was the director of nursing in the surgical hospital, and I reported to an anesthesiologist. Anyway, a few years into that structure, the organization was getting ready for a joint commission visit and was finding it difficult to demonstrate that we had a single standard of care, because each of these hospitals had different policy books and kind of following their own way, and it was a problem. So it was within this scenario that I was called in and asked if I would bring the nursing division back together under one structure, not within the college, but one nursing structure in the hospital. And so that's when I took another seat on the rocket. And I was appointed the chief nursing officer. I think it was a good fit for me at the time. I was never going to be the visionary leader that Luther was, but what was needed in that period was someone who could unite a very disparate and disillusioned group of departments and put us under one structure and lead the organization. And so I agreed to that, and the moral of the story is you never know how high you can go unless you try. And this was climbing the Sydney Bridge in Australia. Now, this is Nepal. This was another one of my favorite visits. And these temples are in Kathmandu, and some of these date back to the 4th century. They're priceless treasures. But the earthquake that happened, and actually it was last April, so it was just about 1 year ago, just reduced a lot of these priceless treasures to rubble. And it makes me so sad to even look at this. But that leads me to my next principle, which is replace the missing bricks. Now, most of us at some point along our careers, we find that we have missing bricks. We have either skills or perspectives or things that are kind of missing in what we need to accomplish the job that's in front of us. And that was no different for me. I started out with a few missing bricks. Because the departments at that time were very fragmented, we weren't working together. We didn't really have a unifying vision. And I had heard about this new magnet thing. It was not known in Chicago at all. And I'd heard about it and I wanted to learn more about it. And so I asked Sue Huerta if she would like to go with me to a conference. So Sue and I went to a conference. It was no more than 200 people in a conference room at Hackensack University. And we learned about this new magnet model. And by the end, we both agreed that that just described Rush nursing to a T. In fact, Rush had been one of the organizations that had been studied when they were developing the magnet forces. But so we thought that that might be a good unifying structure, provide us a good roadmap to follow. And so we thought we'll go for that. And we just needed somebody to take this on. And we were very fortunate that Beverly Hancock was brave enough to take that on, and kind of the rest was history. And it really was kind of the flywheel that propelled us into then getting back to our old selves. And another missing brick for me was the fact that I had spent most of my career growing up here at Rush. I was homegrown, I was inbred, I was parochial. I didn't really have a perspective a whole lot beyond Rush. I didn't want to leave Rush, but I thought, you know, that's a missing brick. I need to find a way to fill in and bring that perspective. And so I decided on two strategies. One was networking, and you can never go wrong with networking. So I became even more involved in some of the professional organizations. Locally, it was IONL. Nationally, it was AONE. But the most important one for me was the Chief Nursing Officers Group at the University Health System Consortium. Now, these are the CNOs from around the country at the academic centers. And we all know that these academic centers are pretty unique, have their own problems and challenges, right, Margaret? And so it was really by getting involved with that group of nurses that I really learned some things about other institutions and other ways of doing things, and it was a real asset to me. And the other way I found that I could learn about other organizations was to become a magnet appraiser. And that gave me the opportunity to go into really some of the finest organizations in the country and really study them in depth and learn from them. So that has led me all over the world. I've even done an international appraisal. So those were good ways for me to replace my missing bricks. Next principle. Learn from those wiser than you. Now, I encountered this strange-looking gentleman when I was seated next to him on one of my flights in India. And I learned from his companion that he is a sadhu sant. Sant like in saint. They consider him a Hindu wise man, a holy man. He has given up all worldly desires and comforts, and he's believed to have deep wisdom. And he was traveling with a television reporter who was with him. They were doing a documentary on him in India. Well, unfortunately, I didn't learn anything from this wise man because he didn't speak any English. I didn't speak any Hindi. And but it was just a very interesting experience traveling with him. But I have been really, really fortunate in my career to have had many wise people who have advised me. From my first head nurse in that trauma unit to people like Joyce Keithley and Margaret and especially from Luther Chrisman. I have just learned so much, and I credit whatever successes I've had to the rich group of individuals I've had the really good fortune to work with. And of course, no matter how good the mentor, sometimes you just need a shoulder to lean on, some arm to lean on, or someone who can make you smile. And so that's my next principle. Friends are important. Now, this is also for my trip to Morocco. We happened to be there on their second most religious day, which next to Ramadan, and it's called the Feast of the Sacrifice. And the characteristic of that day is that they slaughter a sheep, and then 1/3 they keep for their family, 1/3 they share with their friends, and 1/3 they give to the poor. And this is to symbolize their willingness to give up one's own bounties in order to strengthen friendships and to honor Allah. And so when we stopped at this little farmhouse, it was in the middle of nowhere. And again, they spoke no English, but they insisted that we stay and share a meal with them. Now they hadn't finished slaughtering their sheep yet, so we didn't have the sheep. But this woman, she took me by the arm, led me into her kitchen, up to her stove, and she and I fixed. It was basically scrambled eggs with thyme in it. They were just delicious, and had that with some mint tea and some fresh bread that her daughters had made. And gosh, by the end of that memorable meal, I felt I was really lucky to have made this friend. And then she's a chief success who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much. And I just, work-life balance is very important. It's very hard to achieve, but I feel very fortunate that in my retirement, I have been able to achieve some work-life balance, and I'm very happy in my retirement. Or as one of our former Rush colleagues, Joanne Dish, said, my preferment. So thank you very, very much, all of you, for this honor. Very happy.
Thank you so much, Jane, for those great pearls of wisdom. Thank you. So now I have the distinct honor to introduce Dr. Christine Casper, the recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award. Dr. Casper, please join me up front here. Dr. Casper received her Master's of Science degree from Rush in 1976 and is currently Senior Research Scientist and Professor at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences. Her 32-year research career is expansive and includes a focus on cellular mechanisms underlying skeletal muscle atrophy following prolonged immobilization and spaceflight. She is the founding editor of the Biological Research for Nursing and current editor of the Annual Review of Nursing Research. Christine has been principal investigator of multiple National Institutes of Health, NASA, and the Department of Veterans Affairs grants. In 2015, she was inducted into the Sigma Theta Tau International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame. Congratulations, Dr. Casper. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's just really a great homecoming to be back here at Rush, especially see so many people from back when I was a student and a teacher practitioner, immediately following Jane and Joyce and the whole group here. I'm just really thrilled to see you all, and I have to say that I agree with much what Jane said. I don't think I really planned out much of anything either. Really, is the truth. I think it all, when I look back on it, was all networking and taking those lucky, fortuitous things that happened. I think the first lucky thing was my mother really was a devotee of the Press St. Luke's fashion show. And so when I graduated, out of my undergrad program, I said, I really want to go on right away. And it was, well, that place, the fashion show, also has a really good school in nursing. That's kind of how it happened. So I came tripping down here. I think I was 21 years old, so I was really young and naive, and ran into this great faculty of the school, which was just starting, and then took up residence that year up in Schwebbe Spread, 11th floor, and then proceeded to annoy the hell out of Dean Chrisman. Well, like I said, I was really young. I turned 22 the year I was doing my master's degree, and so I thought it was totally cool and okay to come traipsing down the staircase from 11th floor down to the 3rd floor where his office was, and annoy him every day. And he was just so wonderful. He said, "Oh yeah, come on in, and let's talk about stuff." And so during that time, I must say it was his fault. I wouldn't have thought about it. He looked at me one day and said, "Chris." "Yes, sir." And he goes, "You're going to Michigan." And I went, "Why?" He said, "You're going to get your PhD." And I went, "Oh, okay." That's kind of how it started. So I don't think I would have come up with that on my own. So I just briefly want to talk about some of the fun things in science. Some people joke that my RN stands for rat nurse. That's very possible. But I put on this first slide where the question started, and I have to blame Myra Levine, who, those of you know, she wrote a book, had an early theory, and she used to sit there in class, she was my advisor, to talk about mobility and how mobility was so important. Well, it kind of stuck with me. So after my year here, doing my teacher practitioner thing on 5 East Path, and I went off to Michigan, I had to come up with a topic. I literally showed up there. Nowadays they expect PhD students to really know what they want to do. I had no clue. Other than I liked physiology, and that was about it. And then I kept thinking about Myra, and I kept thinking, oh, mobility. Okay. So that's what I came up with. Why were, patients so fatigued after a period of bout of immobility? Why did it take so long to recover? And then very fortuitously, another fortuitous thing, speaking of getting on the ship, I was sitting in my PhD level physiology class, and this guy was sitting next to me, and I said, you're not in nursing, you're not in physiology. Like, what's your program? He says, oh, I'm in exercise science, which was a new thing back then. And I said, well, what do you do down there? He says, I take care of the football team. And I went, I was young, not married. And I said, I'm going to come down there tomorrow, Fred, and you're going to show me what goes on. Well, needless to say, briefly did a few exams of those football players, but found that, they weren't going to let me take biopsies of their legs. So I ended up in a laboratory where the only place to get the information was on rats. So we went forward from that. And, you guys all know this kind of thing. This is where the work is applicable to, all these different conditions. But I was mostly interested in patients who let long periods of bed rest, because that was a group who wasn't studied. And, what happened to them physiologically, and I was thinking, what could we do better to mobilize them faster, keep them moving, and prevent all of these problems? So that's where I started, was, okay, so what was going to happen to the skeletal muscle if you did an imposed atrophy mimicking bed rest for 4 weeks? Because at that time, some people were on bed rest for a long period of time. And then I had this great idea. I thought, hanging around these exercise guys, that obviously, at least I thought, making them exercise after the bed rest was going to be a good thing. Not, but that's where we started. So some of the criteria you have to think about when you do this in mimicking bed rest. I wasn't talking about orthopedic, conditions where people were in a cast or paralysis, but it was a patient who was in a bed who was moving around. They weren't weight bearing, but they were still moving around to some extent. And they could still contract their legs or whatever. So this is the model I came up with. Orthopedic traction tape around the tail. I spent a lot of time in Home Depot getting bars, drilling holes in the top of the cage, pulley systems so they could walk back and forth and get to the food and water. And they're about this is the model now that they use for any kind of atrophy research. And it worked, little you sit there in the mornings and you sit there, play with your rat tails, and what can I say? So how do you exercise? That's how I atrophied them. And it causes significant atrophy. And they still could move, they weren't weight bearing. So how are you going to exercise them and then be able to measure the amount of exercise that you had? I had dreams of this, but it wasn't going to work. We could try, but that actually was on the cover of a magazine recently, The Scientist. I have no idea how they did that. But it's a kind of a nice thought. But that's what my rats look like, actually, pretty much. This is actually what we used. You can get these rodent treadmills that actually go up and down, just like you would use in cardiac to testing. You can variable change the speed at which they run. And if you put the whole top down, you can close it and actually get oxygen uptake measures and all of those other, just like you can in a human. It's kind of fun. You behave yourselves or you're going to jack up the speed. So you can walk them, you can run them, you train them to do whatever. So we did the atrophy, then did this. And I'm thinking, this is the answer to it all. Not really so. This was the paper that came out of it, and actually has an awful lot of citations, very luckily, and boy was I surprised. Essentially what happened is that we found that skeletal muscle is very much like cables, like those big cables supporting a bridge. And you have to have cables large enough to support body weight and support what you're doing. Well, when you have atrophic events going on, and this goes for humans too, and then you weight bear after a long period of atrophy, the cable system's too small to support the weight. And what happens is all of the muscle fibers start rupturing. And you can lose up to 25, 30% of the cross-sectional area of your leg muscles. And if you think back to physiology, force is generated in muscle, per square centimeter. Sometimes it could be like 250 pounds per square inch in like a gastrocnemius. So there's a lot of forces going on. So essentially what happens, if any of you are in orthopedics, you'll know that quadricep ruptures and muscle ruptures are not not uncommon, unfortunately, after, let's say, a knee replacement or hip replacement. It just shows that people were out there being a little too vigorous in their exercise and PT. And so that was the first big study, and I was like, oh, gee, I guess that's why they call it research. So this study kind of got going, and then, the question became, well, why are they necrosing? How are these contractile proteins degrading? And is the speed of, shortening changed? So all these factors. See, I never thought I was going to go anything other than, some clinical level of research, but you follow the question in research. To do good research, you have to follow the question, no matter what it is. It isn't as well, not, I've had 34 PhD students so far that I've chaired, and they always start out, but I want to do qualitative research, or I want to do, and you go, no, what's your question? And what your question is what you're going to do. And that's really important. So I kept getting more and more cellular. And what happens, speaking of, again, these things on the jet taking the seat, I was in my last year at Michigan, and just on the whim, well, it wasn't actually on the whim, we had to go to the departmental physiology things. The speaker was Sue Donaldson. For those of you who know, she was the Associate Dean of Research here, and she, you know, I knew she was from Rush. So afterwards, I went up to her. I said, "Oh, you know, hi, I went to Rush, and you know, I do muscle too, and blah blah blah." And she looked at me and said, "Hi, Dr. Chrisman has a 2-year postdoc position. How would you like it?" And that was the end of that. I ended back here for 2 years. I mean, I swear to God, it was like that. And everybody else in the department was going, "Oh my God." So I then learned this whole method from her of doing single cell contractile properties. So I was actually able to study single cells in muscle to see how they change during atrophy. And so some of this work was done when I was at the University of Wisconsin. And so we actually showed that all of the properties of an individual cell in a muscle when it atrophies just doesn't shrink in size. Literally all the proteins change type and change size and change location. Everything about it remodels completely. It's very what we call plastic. And so what you thought you had is not what you got. I mean, if they start being slow endurance fibers, they turn into more fast sprinting fibers. And so that's why if somebody had good endurance and could make it, if you talk to a patient, yeah, you could go shopping and up and down the aisles of Jewel, not a problem. And then they get out of the hospital, they can't make it down the aisle. Well, all of the muscles and all of the capacity they had for endurance activities has now been changed. So they have to then switch back over time. So, well, we talk about bed rest, we noticed that NASA was doing all these bed rest studies. That was like the epicenter of bed rest research. And so why was that? Because bed rest as a model in a human is identical to spaceflight. Same stuff happens. So I thought, well, this could be cool. And I got a grant from them to do this cool stuff. And they really kind of liked some of the work I had been doing. So I was funded to go play with the astronauts. And we had rats in space, which was a whole different thing. They went up in STS-48 and flew around in weightless environments. So if you think about rats and environments, how you do that, we had to literally manufacture the cages, put the grids in there. They had to make the food different. So it looked like granola bars that went along the walls so they could grip and chew, which cost $35,000 to get those granola bars, get them done. So just as I was saying is that right now the big question, I've done some work now with the National Academy of Medicine, or known as the Institute of Medicine, looking at long-term space flight to Mars. And really their success is going to be depending upon whether or not they can survive with severe muscle atrophy, cardiac atrophy, loss of circulating blood volume, and it's just kind of a mess. A lot of osteoporosis. Yeah, kind of a mess is the scientific way I'd say it. But where those red arrows are actually the rat cages. And we had a interesting event, shall we say, and there's suction devices on the back side of it, like little vacuum cleaners. You can guess why. And one of the guys pulled it out too fast and broke the suction. They had little rat parts floating all over the shuttle. Astronauts, rat things. Yeah, it was very interesting. So after that, again, like I said, following the question, this was the next paper that came off of that. Now we're even more subcellular. We're looking at the nuclei, the myonuclei, which controls size in muscle. And we found that actually the nuclei themselves actually shrink down in size and aren't able to produce as much RNA and transcriptional factors as they normally do. But that was fun. Rats in space. It's nothing like having to, you know, run off and collect your rats off the shuttle when they land. And this is what it looks like, but you can see from this kind of graph, nuclei per millimeter across the y-axis and across the x is actually the volume, how it changes radically over time. And they actually even move around a little bit. So this became, again, another new thing. I changed jobs, went from Hopkins to the Department of Veterans Affairs. What do they do? Take care of the veterans. And in 2003, we had the wars going, so this became the question. And the heavy metals in question was the depleted uranium and the tungsten alloy shrapnel that many of the soldiers were getting. And they have, if you see that, you know, total wounded in action is roughly around, you know, 53,000 people. Of that number, 35 to 50% of them have shrapnel injuries, of which they still have retained metals. Coupled with the fact they also have TBIs, it's kind of not great. So what our lab found, we decided to test what effect the shrapnel had on muscle. And what we found, well, I should say luckily, but I'm glad we found it because it would have been a mess otherwise, was that those metals cause malignant rhabdomyosarcoma. And nobody had really, you know, you talk to the guys making bullets, they say, well, Dr. Casper, the bullets are supposed to kill people. And you go, well, I know, but not our guys, and you really ought to test it before you make bullets out of it. So unfortunately, in a rodent model, rats, mice, whatever, it's 100% death rate. It's easy stats, easy stats. They're all dead out of rhabdo. And so, yeah, very easy stats, you know. It's kind of what it looks like. We put these little tiny pellets in there, made actually like pencil lead. That's actually made from the same munitions factory as the munitions. And it just causes this really bad. So unfortunately, we've had a few cases, but we've been on it. And then we went to the next question. So it's like, why? So we then launched and how long do we have? Because we were worried about, well, if this is going to cause cancer and rhabdomyosarcoma, do we have to take the metal out in the forward field hospital, or do we have to, can we wait till they get to Landstuhl, or can we wait till we get them to Walter Reed? So with one of my PhD students, Stephanie Bardak, who's a public health officer, you know, United States Public Health Service, we ran the genetic studies and to look at what the pathways were that would trigger some of the carcinogenic pathways. And unfortunately, she found that it's like 24 hours that these pathways get kicked off. So it's a bit of a healthcare problem because, you know, when you have in a forward hospital, you're going life, limb preservation of sight, and you really can't pull it. So we're still working on this to see if we can reverse the effects. So, but out of this came a DoD-wide health policy on what was going to happen, that they were going to pull the metals out of the guys, send them in for testing, and put them in their healthcare records so that they could be tracked over time and we wouldn't have problems like we've had with Agent Orange and things of that nature. So that's been in place now, VA-wide and DoD-wide. So the questions continues. This is what we're working on now. Do metals that they have, if they have a TBI at the same time, does that metal move across the blood-brain barrier and then go to the brain? I can tell you from the stuff we've got this year, yes. Unfortunately, it's going to the prefrontal cortex. So we're thinking that some of the PTSD and the bad depressions and all of this is due to a toxic effect. And then we're looking at ways of blocking it. And I have a student right now looking at what the effects are on bone. But we'll be at this for a while. And I've got to say that you can't do this alone. So right now, this is kind of my gang. We're at Casper Lab. Those are all my PhD students. Some have graduated, and then my collaborators. But it takes the village to do this. And you never should think you're doing research alone. If you are, it's a problem. I think you need a team. You need mentors. You need a whole group of people to work with you, or you're never going to be able to pull it off, because you all have your own strengths. You all have bringing different things to the table. And besides, it's a heck of a lot more fun in a group. So that's that. And I thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Casper. What an interesting and phenomenal research trajectory. And we have two, as you see, phenomenal distinguished alumni recipients this year. And we have an opportunity for some questions. Anyone have a question for either Dr. Llewellyn or Dr. Casper? Mm-hmm.
So the recent astronaut returned from a very long time in space, and in terms of some of the issues that he came home with from being weightless, were you surprised by anything in terms of what he experienced?
No, they had to do that. We pretty much back up. NASA's been doing that kind of work since literally the 60s, and the accumulated amount has been pretty substantial. So they pretty much predicted all that was happening, but they had to really do a twin study of this nature to really prove the point unequivocally. And so, yeah, he's kind of not in great shape at the moment. It's going to take about 6 months before he's really moving again.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both for sharing your knowledge with us. I have a question about implications this has in the city of Chicago. We have terrible violence going on with people that are shot and traumatic brain injuries for other reasons. So what implications does this have for the broader population with regard to all the shot violence?
Well, the first thing, if you're involved with these populations, I would do some investigation as to what the police or whoever, what people with guns here are using as the bullets. What are the metals that they're made of? And only recently we found that lead duck shots being replaced with tungsten alloy. And some police forces are beginning to use tungsten. So that means that it's important to collect and to breed new things, to collect the metals and possibly get tested, so the person knows what it is. It may be in this area that you don't use those things, but not all the metals are tested. So I think people have to be monitored and be aware that they have them in them, and just kind of watched, because we really don't know all the ramifications can be from the various metals. And if they have the TBI at the same time, it really can be quite deleterious. So I think some good DNP projects could be students tracking that stuff down would be really good.
I'd like to add to that. This may seem like it's really a segue, but one of the things that I'm doing in my preferment is I'm taking some study groups at Northwestern, and the one that I'm in now is on urban violence. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a pediatrician who talked to us about the effect that witnessing all of this violence on young children. They're seeing their classmates shot, their fathers shot, they're seeing all of this violence, mediate the catecholamines that are going through their blood all the time. But in many of these families, these kids don't have those mediating factors. And he showed us MRIs of, an infant, their synapses are really very rudimentary. 2 years old, we've got a few more synapses. And then as an adult, we've got a lot of synapses that we've developed. Well, what he showed was that these kids that grow up in these neighborhoods where there is continual violence and they don't have home situations where they have mediating factors, that they don't develop the synapses. Their MRIs look more like the 2-year-olds. And so then what happens when you have a young man with an undeveloped amygdala, a gun in his hand, anger that he can't control, and violence.
Mm-hmm.
There's another way to look at it. And if you think of, I talk about a traumatic brain injury with the military. We're not only talking about there's somebody actually has a concussive event. We're talking about blast injury. And we know now that repeated blast injuries will cause substantial brain damage. It's the same effect as with football players. I mean, actually, there's been a really nice study about 2 years ago where they actually compared the two groups. It was identical. So when you think in the urban situations, shaken baby syndrome, kids get beaten up, all of that causes concussions. And they're not even playing football. And then you add to it environmental toxins. This is heavy metal, so it's not just tungsten, it's lead, it's any other heavy metal. So a lot of work can be done monitoring for toxic exposures to be able to inform the patient care. And I really think that's where nursing comes in, and some really cool clinical projects that we've done. Just trying to get the data. Because you have the PA will get this massive database and say, okay, how many of these guys at this age had a TBI and a shrapnel? You would think I'd be able to get the answer. It's difficult. So people need to be recording that, putting it in the record, keeping track of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Following up what you just said, Chris, there's also that project that Organized Nursing has been supporting about asking in every nursing assessment, every medical assessment, every health history, have you ever served in the military? Many people keep it buried. They don't talk about it openly. So they have to be prodded to talk about their military experience. So it's a huge effort right now to get that put in the health records. And I think we have an opportunity, since many places are moving to electronic health records, and there are changes being made to suggest, if you sit on one of those committees, suggest adding that. It's just one more question. I know health history is pretty detailed, but it's a pretty important question to uncover some of these kinds of issues. It's extremely important. It really is. The Have You Served campaign is very important. And it's amazing. You would never know it unless you work with the nurse. How many toxic exposures the military have gone through. I mean, just over the years. And it is just amazing. So just having that on health record could inform any of the things you see.
Any other questions? Thank you all, and thank you to our award recipients for that really terrific presentation. And the pearls of wisdom for the young folks in the room. I think you need to consider taking a seat on the Redfish ship, right?
I thought I was talking real
Yeah. We do have CEUs and we have more networking and wine. So I think we have an evaluation, right, Megan? So if you can complete that, you will get your CEU certificate via email. Thanks again, and stay for a little while.